we do, then that will be tender in wherever she is.
And Conciliator, he's been our guest analyst on Off the Press. Mercy.
Thank you very much for having me. Do have a nice day.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for being part of the conversation. We look forward to having more of you on Tuesdays. And that's it. We will come back with the papers tomorrow. And as always, we would always have a guest who joins the conversation. Let's get back with the men conversation. I mean, we're going to come back with the men conversation at 8 o'clock, where we look straight at what's happening in the West African region, with Burkina Faso experiencing another coup.
Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. Welcome to your favorite program, The Moment of Truth, brought to you by the Citadel Global Community Church. Our God is a God of salvation, far above all principality and power, and might and dominion, that regardless of what happens in this season, you will escape. Say to your neighbor, there is no peace for the wicked. The lazy man does not rouse what he took in hunting, but diligence is a man's precious possession. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might.
Moment of Truth with Pastor Tunde Bakare, Sundays, 7 p.m. on PlusTvAfrica.
Nigeria's Niger Delta region, from where the black gold fuels Africa's largest economy, where the lines between wealth and poverty has never been thinner. Conflicts, poverty, insecurity, and environmental challenges daily confront the region. How can the Niger Delta story be changed for the better?
Join Mamude Akuga at 9 p.m. every Friday evening on PlusTvAfrica as he probes deep in search of solutions.
Inside the Niger Delta with Mamude Akuga, the authentic voice of Nigeria's oil-rich region.
In raising our kids, parents should stop playing
into family values in every sense of the word.
Join us every Saturday at 9:15 a.m. on PlusTvAfrica, DSTV channel 408.
With you, we play a part in strengthening the values passed from generation to generation.
African nation of Burkina Faso rebelled, demanding the sacking of the military top brass and more resources to fight a bloody jihadist insurgency in the country. Later in the day, gunshots were heard near the private residence of the president in the capital, Ouagadougou, and witnesses reported seeing a helicopter hovering above it. Well, on Monday, those mutinous troops arrested President Christian Kabore and detained him in the army barracks. And later that day, the soldiers went live on national television to announce that they had deposed President Roch Kabore, suspended the constitution, dissolved the government and the National Assembly, and closed the country's borders. The announcement, signed by Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba and a Lieutenant Colonel, and read by another officer, Sitsore Kedar Wedrago, on state television, said the takeover had been carried out without violence and those detained were in a secure location. Now, this is the third military takeover in the West African sub-region in the last 18 months. Why? Now, to help us answer this and other questions, let's say good morning to Paul Ejime, who's a global affairs analyst, and he joins us this morning on The Breakfast. Mr. Ejime, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with the first question. Why? Why are we having a repeated incidences of coups in West Africa? We had Mali, we had Guinea, and now we have Burkina Faso. What's going on?
And we'll probably have more. It's not a good prophecy or prediction, but it's really predictable the way things are going. It is a lack of, good governance, or if you like, poor governance, and the fact that what now matters to using them to either gain power or perpetrate themselves in power. They fiddle with the Constitution, they conduct flawed elections, and then they abuse human rights. These are the triggers and drivers of these incursion. And then I think West Africa should be really careful that we, at the end of this year, will not end up with having half of the ECOWAS member states being governed by the military. Military has no place in they are not wired to govern. But the point is that each time you find these politicians doing unconstitutional acts, and then the civilians come on the street, they use this same military to suppress them. And then the military now, they say, well, since they have the instrumentality, the power of coercion, they can now rise up and say, well, listen, you get out. But that is not to say that they have done a very good job of it, because that is not their remit. That is not their mandate. It is to protect the country and protect the citizens. But the politicians are not doing this, are not doing that, having the so-called mandate of the people. So questions should be asked. How did we have now given you the background to how we got here. How do we get out? I think we will answer that as we go on this program.
All right. Are we moving forward or backward in Africa? I mean, you're looking at the fact that we've had several coups over the past years. It would have been thought that democracy, was gaining a foothold in Africa. You've had, elections in stable countries, even with those that have dictatorships like Togo. They've been stable over the past years, like Cameroon have been stable over the past years. And one would have thought that Africa had moved on from the 90s, the 80s, and the 70s, where coups were the order of the day. We look at what's been happening since 2017. In Zimbabwe, there was a Guardian coup in November 2017. In April 2019, Sudan had a coup. In August 2020, there was a coup in Mali. In April 2021, there was a Chadian covert coup. In May 2021, another coup in Mali. September 2021, a coup in Guinea. October 2021, another coup in Sudan. And now we're here in Burkina Faso. Are we going back to the 70s, 80s? In fact, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s?
Well, I like your chronology, and that it couldn't have been, it's very factual, and then it's there for everyone to see. So what is there? What I can say is that it appears there is a progression in democracy. But democracy is not the question. It is the practitioners, the politicians, who have now found a way around it, using, like I said, the structures and the institutions of democracy to now, do their own bidding and not governing. They are now they are not serving. They now want to be served. But leadership is troublesome. So it is lack of leadership. It is that dearth of leadership that is causing all this. And so the people will now have to take power from this, because power is given to this. They are elected to serve the people. They're holding power in trust. But what they are doing, is not in trust. They are actually dominating and then lording it over the people. And that is why the civil society and the citizens, before you now vote, you have to look at the credentials of people you are putting in power. Money plays a big role, and coercion. Like I said, they use this military that have now found a way of saying, no, listen, for instance, where was it? Somebody who was, you saw him holding the umbrella for one of the heads of state, but later became the one who took over from him. That is in Guinea. So it will continue unless and until African leaders learn to govern. People in Africa, the electorate, hold their leaders to account. Because that is not happening. Instead, at times they are clapping for them, or they will be the ones to go and vote when they have referendum to change constitutions. And suddenly, and then you see when the military takes over, there is a jubilation. But that is that honeymoon does not last, because the military, when having tested power, they also want to perpetrate themselves, and so they have not. That is not their role. But what do? If you make a peaceful change impossible, then you have to go for violence. So the politicians, the leadership, it is that deficit of leadership, it is that that is happening. That is what is causing all this. And I think Africa, you were having two governments, one in the bush and one in the city. Is that where we are going? But they know why we are there. When these politicians are doing what they are doing, their colleagues are not called them to order. For instance, the coup in Burkina Faso, nobody will tell me that it came out of the blue. No, because for several months, people have been on the street protesting. And
so it brings me back to, I mean, right there immediately. But I'm sorry that I have to interject, so we can actually share your thoughts on this one. Some people are already saying that maybe, military governments are right, the way forward for Africa as it is. Because just like you were mentioning that Burkina Faso didn't just happen. You had the fact that civilians, including the military, crying out about, all of the ills that's going on, especially the fact that the government could not tackle the issue of Islamic insurgents at the time that destabilized the government. And with other countries, in the region that experienced the coup, this has always been the case. So, and in Nigeria as well, you also have a lot of people who will be saying, maybe we should go back to the military. So the question now is, do you think that the military is the way forward for Africans?
No. I mean, that will be, because you will notice that the military also organized coups against, state coups against themselves. So if they were wonderful, you will think that they will bring the El Dorado that people want. But how can we be thinking like, as if we are going back to the Stone Age? Are we now early man, the key man? When the rest of the world are moving towards development, they are moving towards digital life. How can the military is not wired, they cannot. It is not their role. So it is that the politicians are now providing them with the excuse. But that is why I say, well, the solution is for the people to take back power. They cannot kill everybody, the military. You saw what we are seeing, what is unraveling in Myanmar. Let them kill. They can, the civilians or the electorate are becoming too comfortable. They don't want to die. Feda will say it. My mother is there, my father is there, my child is there. But you have to sacrifice. Freedom can never be given. You have to take it. Rights. Your right is to be taken, not to fight for it. Nobody can surrender their right. The politicians are enjoying themselves. They don't want to leave power. That is why they have this issue of elongation. That is why they rig elections to remain in power. And then because they are enjoying it. But that is not the way. They are not serving the people. African leaders are not leading. The AU, African Union, is not doing its job like the Organization of African Unity. And then the regional economic communities like ECOWAS, they have now fallen back. They are losing steam. They are no longer doing what they are supposed to do. You know, there are instruments that they can use to call, just like they are now condemning political military coups. There are instruments that says that you have to respect the Constitution. You have to respect the rights of the people. You have to respect, rule of law. But they are not addressing that. All they are saying is once the military, the same military that they use, they appoint, in any case, they appoint the military hierarchy. And they cannot rule without, they have there is marriage, of inconvenience between the two of them, the military and the politicians. But now, when one sees that they are not getting what they want, the people become the victim. Let people rise. For instance, in Burkina Faso, what has heightened the thing was civilians were being killed by these insurgents, and suddenly soldiers were involved, scores of soldiers. Recently, about 20 soldiers were killed. And they're telling President Kabore, do something. And he rode on that to gain power, to be elected in 2015. Now he cannot do anything. Just like Keita in Mali, he has said that he will fight terrorism. They never do that. Instead, they will use the weapons that were donated by partners to go and be terrorizing and oppressing the civilians. And then civilians, they don't have arms. They don't have the coercion, that instrument. It's the military that has it. That is why it appears that it's the military. In some senses, the military is venting, elevating the anger, the frustration of the people. But their own is also that they overdo it. Some of them are adventurists. They want to get power, very young people. But they need to be guided, to be told that their position, they are citizens, by the way. But every citizen, everybody, you have your role to play in society. Okay, that is why a carpenter cannot do the job of an electrician or engineer.
Okay, but let me take you back again, because I remember when we had this conversation of recent, when we're talking about the Malian coup, and you said that the community, especially the ECOWAS community, had not moved swiftly because they probably would have, moved with the sanctions. And now we have seen that Mali had been sanctioned. But it doesn't really change anything. One would think that would be a deterrent, to other countries and maybe the juntas in other countries to, take a lesson from there. But it feels like these sanctions from ECOWAS doesn't really hold weight. I mean, it's not effective.
Yeah, I can't remember saying that, it is sanctions. Sanctions alone cannot do it. What I'm saying is for them to play by the rule. Because the politicians, they are partly the reason, the cause for this, by their conduct, by their body language, and then by what they do. And people are listening to them. People are watching them. You cannot go and change the constitution illegally to give yourself power, to gain power or perpetuate yourself, or rig elections, and or begin to disrespect the rights of so many people they are not obeying human rights or respecting human rights. Many people are in jail. For instance, in Benin, a woman is in jail because she dared to contest the presidential election. Now they have thrown her in jail, citing terrorism because of charges of terrorism, and nobody is saying anything there. When Conde was changing constitution in Mali, in Guinea, nobody said anything. When Keita was, oppressing his people and coming too hard on them because he failed to deliver on security issue, nobody talked. It was now when the civilians were on the street. You will always see this, that civilians, at times they do their bits, but because they are powerless, they don't have weapons. So that is why it appears. But this same Burkina Faso, was a place where civilians came on the street, about 2 million of them in 2014, to force from office Blaise Compaoré. You remember him, the man who has now been implicated in the killing of his friend in the coup of 1987, Thomas Sankara. And they are now trying to begin a trial for Compaoré. It is not unlikely that Compaoré supporters who do not want his trial could be part of the elements that are working to stop that trial. It is not impossible, but the whole bulk stops at the level of leadership. It is the lack of leadership, because if you wanted to make a mark, if you're visionary, you're revolutionary in your thinking, and you have the interests of the people at heart, you move a ball beyond your own personal interests to talk about, the collective. The African leaders are not thinking about collective. They are thinking about self and their families and their friends. That is the difference. But you are given the mandate to govern for the whole people. You become the president or prime minister for the whole nation.
So you've made a point.
Sectional.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir, but you've made a point, that the African Union, the Economic Community of African States, and basically the leaders on the continent should not just only stand up to condemn, coups and to place sanctions on nations where you have coups, but should also advise their peers when they're going wrong. But some people have said, these coups, no matter how well-intentioned they are, no matter how many people are crying on the streets, because you will agree that even though you have people protesting against the governments in these West African countries, including Burkina Faso, those in power also have their supporters who can also go on the streets. But some have said that the worst democracy is better than the best military rule or the best military intervention. And the best way to solve this out is either through people power or through the ballot box. Let's go back to Mali, where you talked about the removal of Keita. We can see that these guys came in May 2021. And till to date, we don't know what's happening with the elections in that country. They've suspended or extended the elections through it 5 years down the road, 5 years, and of course brought in the Wagner Group, Russian private military force into that country. So shouldn't we be doing everything we can, whether the civilians are doing well or not, to still condemn and reject and dissuade military intervention in our democracy in West Africa?
Yes, I agree with you. Condemn, but after condemnation, what follows? You mentioned the fact that in Mali, look at what is happening. In fact, actually, it was 2020 that these people, the Goita people took over and then organized another coup in August of 2021. So they are what you call bad faith actors. They came there, they haven't done anything for the past 16 months. And that is part of the problem. But now, ECOWAS has a body made up, 15. Now they have suspended 2. Maybe they will also add Burkina Faso to the list. But that is not the issue. Sanctions or suspension. What next? You now have to negotiate with these people to bring them to the table and tell them, it's like a child that is misbehaving in the family. What do? Do you kill the child, or do you, isolate them, or send them away? You, as statesmen, but because these statesmen have not acted in good faith. You mentioned Wagner. What business is it of anybody to begin to meddle in? Nigeria, at one point, asked Chad to help. The Chadian leader, Idris Deby, was pushing Boko Haram and everybody from his own territory to Nigerian territory. It is not there. By the way, we have also to talk about the influence, external factors. France has not conducted itself in glory in its former colonies in West Africa, in Africa. So that is part of the problem. It is France that is pushing this issue of Wagner, because Russia, and now they want to dominate. He wants to continue to dominate his former colonies in Africa. That is why it is against any other country coming in. You know, but that is their own national interest. But why should Africans now? Africans are supposed to be independent. Why should ECOWAS, for instance, be hammering on the fact that Mali, if France says, France that has been there since 2013, and then there is a UN peacekeeping force of about 15,000. France has about 5,000. They have not been able to end the insecurity in Mali. And the Malians are now saying, listen, let us try. By the way, France says they are drawing down on the 5,000 that they have. Plus the fact that 15,000 from MINUSMA or from the UN have not been effective. And this guy said, okay, let us go to another country.
Sentence. What's your take on the increasing jihadist and insurgency threat across the northern parts of several West African countries? Chad, they have had an experience. Nigeria is having his experience. In Mali, they've had an insurgency for donkey years now up north, and we're hearing also Burkina Faso, and these are also linked to the coups. What's your take on this growing sort of jihadist insurgency sweeping across West Africa?
Well, so we have to look at the costs or the causes. Some of them are political. Others are, you know, the fact that come as a collective partnership. Terrorism, you can't fight it alone. Come as a group and then decide. But by the way, make sure that individually in your countries, you are not promoting or inadvertently promoting this type of insurrection. Or, you know, hatred, or all kinds of things.
Okay.
Governance is about the welfare of the people. If you know the factors that are giving rise to insurrection, and then go and address it.
All right.
Meaningfully, faithfully, and then honestly.
Thank you very much. Paul Ejime is a global affairs analyst, and he's been giving us some very, very interesting and intelligent analysis on the unfolding events in the West African nation of Burkina Faso following that coup d'etat there. Mercy.
Well, thank you so
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Paul Ejime, for coming. We do appreciate your time, and we look forward to having this conversation as we proceed. Well, we will actually take a break. When we come back, we will be looking at the suspension of the subsidy by the federal government and the implication for the PIA. Stay tuned.
What we do not understand, we will stigmatize.
What you can see is the remaining of the tanker that exploded.
The suspect equally confessed.
A 500 naira they collect them. If you no talk, they go beat you. Now 2,500 they pay.
Hello and welcome. It's needed to ensure that there is regulation and promotion of matters affecting our waters. NIMASA bears responsibility for search and rescue, shipping development, and ship registration.
NIMASA This Week, the voice of maritime, showing on this channel.
Welcome back to The Breakfast on Plus TV Africa. Second conversation is about the suspension of fuel subsidy by the federal government. After weeks of uncertainty over whether or not the federal government intends to go ahead with the planned removal of petrol subsidy, the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning has announced that the subsidy removal will be suspended till further notice. This announcement came after a meeting between the Senate President, Ahmed Lawan, and the Minister Zainab Ahmed and Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Timipera Silva. This came in amidst a threat by Labour Union to embark on a national strike. Now, to help us look at the implication of this regime or removal, as it were, and if you want to look at it by February, we probably should not be talking about whether or not government is going to be involved in subsidy removal. What does this make? What's the implication of all of this now that the federal government has taken a U-turn? Could this be that the law is turning on itself?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I think the government of Nigeria has it all to blame itself for boxing themselves into this petrol subsidy regime that they have implemented over time. And it's unfortunate that the present APC-led government in their manifesto made it very clear that they were going to do away with this subsidy regime. Because in their own words, they said that it was a scam. And truly, there is the fuel subsidy thing is like a black box. You will never be able to understand it. And the reason why I blame the government for boxing itself into this quagmire is that there are many other products in Nigeria that are even more essential to Nigerians, that the government doesn't bother the price at which Nigerians buy it in the market. I'll give you a few examples. Food. There is no human that can do without food. But the government is not bothered about how much we buy food in the market. Drugs. When we are sick, we need medicines. Without those medicines, we will likely die. The government is not bothered about how much we buy medicines in the pharmacies. The same thing for rent. The same thing for buying clothes, for buying electronics, for buying houses. The government is not bothered. The government has allowed all those things to be priced in accordance with market forces. Even in the fuel sector, kerosene, which is the fuel that is used almost exclusively by the poor, the government has deregulated it. And the poor people are going into the petrol stations and buying kerosene at market prices. The same thing with diesel. Diesel that is used by the productive sector. As I speak to you, all the big buses, all the trains, all the trucks that are conveying the masses to and fro from their places of work and their homes are on diesel. And the price of that diesel is at the market rate. And the operators of those transport systems have already passed those market rates to the poor people who are in those buses. Farm equipment like tractors, we have factories, we have offices. They are all on big generators that are using diesel. The government is not bothered about how much they buy the diesel because the price has since been deregulated. But when we now come to a single product in Nigeria, one product called petrol, PMS, the government insists that the petrol must sell at the same price all over the nation. So the government is doing two things. First, is fixing the price, which is what the former PPRA were doing. And then the government is ensuring that the price must sell at the same rate from north to south, east to west. That same government that we see a cow sold in Katsina for 30,000 and sold in Lagos for 500,000 without doing anything about it. That government insists that this single product must be sold at that same price all over the nation. But again, the government is also boxing itself further into trouble. How? Because Nigeria has a refining capacity of 445,000 liters, of barrels of crude oil every day. If those refineries were working at full capacity, they will refine enough petrol for Nigeria's consumption and have enough for export. But the government has not allowed the refineries to work. Neither is the government interested in either leasing out the refineries or selling them out. The government is sitting on top of refineries that are not working. Refineries that we are spending almost $500 billion every year to run and refine 0 barrels of crude oil.
All right.
The other thing is that this government, having not let the refineries to work, is now the sole importer of petrol. But why is the government not allowing the private sector to come in and import the petrol?
But that's but the PIA actually allows that deregulation and pricing concept. That's the legal framework, and that's what the PIB ensures. And so if the government had already passed that, I mean, we have the PIB as an act now, and we should govern the activities, of the oil sector, I mean, to some extent. Then why is the government now going back and saying we cannot?
That's exactly. So these are issues. A government that has signed a law, have signed a bill into law, is not implementing the law. It's not letting the law operate as signed by the president. So this is the issue. You see, in the UK, depending on their cost efficiency or where they source their rice, they could sell their rice at different prices. So why is the government not taking a simple step like that? By saying, look, if anybody wants to import petrol into Nigeria, go ahead and import the petrol. We as a government, we're interested in quality control. We will test and make sure your petrol is fit for the engines that are running in Nigeria. And once that happens, you will begin to see investors come into the sector, importing petrol and selling at prices that give them a profit. And once people see people making a lot of profit from that business, they will start coming into the sector. And gradually the prices will start coming down because competition will set in. That is one thing. The other thing is that why are we having pressure on petrol in Nigeria? We're having pressure on petrol in Nigeria because we have a government that is seeing our gas being flared and they are doing nothing about it. Instead of harnessing the gas and putting them into power plants so that we can generate electricity for the entire country, Nigerians are living in darkness, so they have all sorts of petrol generators all over the place, and they are going to the petrol station to buy petrol to put in those generators. If government just lets electricity to be supplied to this economy, there will be no need for those small generators that are having pressure on petrol. Okay. That is the other thing.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Guli, last year or so, if I remember correctly, when this issue of fuel subsidy removal came up, and Labour began to make some noise. I think it should be either 2021 or 2020. The federal government called the Labour leaders, NLC, TUC, into a roundtable and set up a committee to look at certain issues and to see how best to fix a price that will be favourable to the people. If we talk about the Petroleum Industry Act, we're aware that Labour has been also a very, very active part in the discussions that have been going on, and the public hearings that have been going on. Many unions within the larger umbrella of Labour in Nigeria, especially the oil and gas industry, made presentations and submitted papers and memoranda whilst the discussions with the PIA were going on. Now, if we're talking about the regulation of this sector and the expected implementation of PIA, you are saying the government is departing. Well, the Senate President is saying Labour needs to shelve its planned strike for now because the federal government has backtracked on its decision. But they're saying there's no going back on the track. But people are asking, Labour has been part of the process and has been aware of what's coming for some time now, so why are they making some noise? What do you say to this?
Well, I duly support Labour for their agitations because they are representing the people are called the masses of the country. But Labour also has to look at this issue dispassionately. They have to take away their eyes from emotions. They don't have to be emotional about these issues. Number one, if we have subsidy removed today, who are the people that will be worst hit? The first people that will be worst hit are West African countries. West African countries, it's not even Nigerians. West African countries that come to Nigeria and smuggle our subsidized petrol to their own countries. At the advent of the current regime, daily consumption of petrol was being estimated at around 30 million liters per day. Today, we're talking 60, 70 million liters. Have the number of cars on Nigerian roads doubled? The answer is no. Where is that petrol going? About 30 to 40 million liters of petrol are being smuggled across Nigeria's borders into West African countries. And the people who we lose will be those West African countries. We have small West African countries like Benin, Togo that are buying petrol at market prices, and the economies have not collapsed. So when you now talk about Nigeria buying petrol at market prices, 5 naira in the villages, it actually only sells for 165 naira in big cities like Lagos and Abuja, where the rich men have dozens of cars. You go to some estates, you are going to see 7, 8, 12, 15 cars parked in front of residences of big men. They will be the people that will be hit. And of course, those who are benefiting from the subsidy regime through corrupt means will be the worst hit as well. So the masses that Labour is actually fighting for are going to be the last on the ladder in terms of those who will be hit. So why should a poor woman go into a petrol station to buy kerosene at market prices? An artisan who needs diesel in his machine to be able to do his work for the day goes into a petrol station to buy diesel at market prices. Then the billionaire that comes with his convoy of SUVs into that petrol station is now buying petrol at 165. And who is paying for the 165? Is the money that should have been used to provide healthcare, education, roads, and other infrastructure for the masses that is being used to subsidize the billionaire and his convoy of SUVs. So these are the issues that the government must look, Labour must look at dispassionately and ask, who is actually benefiting from this subsidy as we speak now? And now let me tell you one thing. The budget, the national budget, the federal government budget that President Buhari signed into law did not provide for subsidy from July to December. Now that the government says they will provide for the subsidy, where is the money going to come from? The money is going to come from borrowings. So Nigeria is now going to go and borrow because in the entire revenue of government for 2022 is just about 5 or 6 trillion, and we're running a budget of 17 trillion. The revenue is 8 trillion, and we're running a budget of 17 trillion. So if additional cost through subsidy is going to come in July to December, it will be money that will be borrowed. So how can we go borrowing?
Okay, Nick Agule, we're out of time now, and let's just add this as we share your thoughts in a minute or so. What is the better time to remove subsidy?
Well, so the question I'll ask the federal government is that subsidy was removed on kerosene. They didn't bother about the inflationary effect on the masses. It was removed on diesel, which is used in the productive sector. They didn't bother about the inflationary pressures on the items that are used in the productive sector, like food is carried in trucks that use diesel. They didn't bother about all that. So I would say that this whole issue of the government lacking courage to take this decisive step. Could also be anything to do with politics. Because now they believe that if Nigerians are angry with them, election is coming up just next year. What I would then say is that if the government has now become lily-livered to backtrack on what they want to do, then let the government start setting aside crude oil. Crude oil which they will give to the Dangote refinery, which is expected to commence refining in the third quarter of this year. The government of Nigeria should start feeding Dangote refinery with crude oil at cost, not market prices, at cost, because this crude oil belongs to us. And Dangote refinery will be able to refine this crude and sell it to Nigeria even below the current 165.
That's certainly another issue that we can spend another 30 minutes talking about. We certainly would hope for another time and opportunity with you, Mr. Ajule, to discuss this further. But thank you very much for joining us on The Breakfast this morning.
Thank you very much and have a nice day.
All right. Very interesting, Mercy, conversations around subsidy removal and, of course, the confusion and the back and forth between the president, the Senate president. Yeah, we'll have to go abroad. Well, I don't think Nigerians are expecting that Dangote will give them petrol for free.
No, but he's saying that,